İnsanın daxili psixoloji aləmini, onun şəxsiyyətini...
Artists sometimes make use of dozens of colors so as to clearly portray and identify the integral psychological world of man. But sometimes we see such people that one single color is enough to represent them. So to depict such a personage, it is just sufficient for the artist to find that very color, the color that embodies the entire life of the character.
On
December 15th, 1995, passengers on board a plane from Moscow to Delhi would never think that their flight is opening a new passage in the history of India. Just a few months later, a passenger among them will fulfill a mission that can be considered as a turning point in the fate of the Indian Republic and its citizens. This is Eyyub Tagiyev. In June 1955, the entire world was watching the development of the USSR-India relations. At that time, agreement on economic assistance had been between the USSR and India during Jawaharlal Nehru's visit to Moscow. One of the main provisions in this agreement was the USSR's assistance to the establishment of India's oil industry. Western specialties persistently denied the presence of oil in India. Jawaharlal Nehru knew what was behind this. Dehradun, India. Living in a country house around the city, Mr. Ganguly is one of the rare photographers who snapshot the history of the Indian Oil and Gas Corporation.
Neft ehtiyatlarının qiymətləndirilməsi və geoloji kəşfiyyat işlərinin aparılması üçün
Indian Prime Minister Mr. Nehru personally met with a group of Soviet specialists who arrived in India for geological exploration and assessment of India's oil resources. He told Eyyub Tagiyev at the meeting, "We need our oil. We spend $200 million a year to buy oil from Western companies." Meanwhile, under instructions of Nehru, a group of Indian specialists headed by Indian Minister of Natural Resources, Malavia, traveled to Azerbaijan, which was the oil academy of the USSR. They came to explore activities in the oil industry, oil equipment procurement from the USSR, and study of Indian specialists there. At that time, the oil exploration group had already started exploration in states which was more likely to have oil. As a result, the Soviet geologists disproved the previous estimation of 5 million tons of oil reserves in Assam, boosting the estimation to at least 30 million tons. In March 1956, a report on the country's oil reserves was submitted to the government of India, and a precise plan of oil and gas exploration activities was prepared in 1956 through 1961. Forecast by Tagiyev and his team came true.
Tağıyevin ve köməkçilərinin proqnozları özünü doğrultdu.
Remembrance means one thing you will understand. In those days, ONGC used to form, ONGC used to start the work and the other things. So, 30 days in a month, 22 days we are out from Dehradun. 7 or 8 days hardly we will be. So, we have done this work 10, 15 years like this, Our main man was, oil first came in Ankleshwar project. That photographs are also there, Amin Ghosh is standing. So after that, you see, gradually, we reached to Assam, where there was fire, tremendous fire in the oil. Say about 10 to 15 days, there was fire and fire. and all the Russian people, you see, they are expert people. They used to come with this overcoat, which is against this what we called fire.
1956 yılın yayından başlayarak
Since the summer of 1956, the Indian oil workers were sent to Azerbaijan for education and practical training. Although this cooperation relations were officially between two countries, India and the USSR, but Azerbaijan had a share in cooperation. The Indian Vice President's visit to Baku as an oil center of the USSR demonstrated with the utmost importance of this region of India. Azerbaijan-India relations were developed not only at the official level, but also in the field of culture and art as a separate line. In fact, the relations were not a new invention, but just a restoration of relations that was forgotten in the ups and downs of history.
unutulmuş əlaqələrin bərpasıydı.
People, the boys, those are drilling boys, drilling engineers also. They were all packed, batch by batch, and sent to Russia for the training. They got training, came back, Cambay, Ankleshwar, all these places they worked, and they found oil. Russia always, they used to help, always. There was nothing, no call there. And to tell you one thing, whenever we have gone to any project, say it is Ankleshwar, say it is Rajasthan, say it is Assam, say it is Kanyakumari, all the places.
At the end of 1958, oil well number 1 drilled by Soviet specialists in Punjab started to gush oil from 1,500 meters of depth. From Eyyub Tagiyev's diary, before the commencement of drilling, Indians suddenly began to hesitate whether to go ahead. There was rumor of who would pay the cost if no oil was found. Then I told them that I would pay all the costs if the well didn't produce oil. A large amount of award was offered to me when oil gushed from the well. Of course, I could not take it, and I told them that I am not here for the money, but to fulfill the task of the Soviet government to assist you.
Каждый человек, который находится на стратегическом направлении в какой-то стране.
In addition to the profession, each person in a foreign country for any strategic direction should be a diplomat, a politician.
Такую же, как и профессиональная, является и.
You cannot make in this rather than in your professional activities. Professional work is creativity.
В большей степени нельзя ошибиться вот здесь, чем в профессиональных делах, потому
You
что
can say that we did all we could, but it happened so. Here you can be forgiven. There are millions of such examples. For example, they forgave Americans after they couldn't find oil and didn't cut off ties. Americans have always had an eye on the situation you should make worth nothing wrong. Tagiev was one of the key figures and factors. He knew whom, what, when, and at what stage it was possible to give information. All this is policy. Business is always about politics. Here it is the double, because the question is revolution.
Экономика вообще всегда связана с политикой, а тут это вдвойне, потому что речь идет о перевороте.
Later on, a monument was erected in Ankleshwar to the first well drilled by Indian and Soviet specialists on Tagiev's insistence.
They used to guide. Yes, go ahead. No, there will be no oil. No, we are not getting anything. Sabutina and Dr. Lubimova. Sabutina, Dr. Lubimova, both. They used to work and they used to guide like anything. Yes, go there. Yes, you will find something. I found Gujarat, Rajasthan, all these places they found. And then you say Bombay High. Bombay High, yes, Bombay High also.
Hindistan öz neftinin olduğuna inandı.
India believed that it has oil and a 5-year development plan and improved for oil industry. Tagiyev was appointed oil consul for life in the Indian Republic administration.
Ömürlük müşavir tayin olundu.
Мне отец просто рассказывал, что он был по рекомендации Eyyub Tagiyev тоже приглашен в Индию работать.
With guarantee from Eyyub Ismailovich, my father worked there for several years during his office time and later on.
И он рассказывал, что любой вопрос, который возникал в Индии и казался безумно сложным,
As his successor, he said there was very difficult problems in India. Say there was a need for a drilling rig, an expensive one, other equipment needed. You went to officials about such things, but in vain.
На достаточно высокой должности уже после отъезда Тагиева. Он говорит, последнее, говорит, что я мог сделать, и я, говорит, к этому редко прибегал, но я это делал.
Then, after Tagiyev came there, my father was in quite a high position. And he said that he sometimes had one option, to go to those high-ranking officials and say that I just talked to Eyyub in Moscow, who recommended transfer of that equipment to this location.
Советовал вот сделать вот там перебазировку оборудования, такую очень дорогую. Вот, другого выхода он не видит, и я спрашиваю вас, Наум Ильич говорит, я спрашиваю, есть у вас какие-то трудности?
When hearing reference from Tagiyev, the facial expressions of officials used to change and they did everything as we wanted.
И тут же все начинало вертеться. И все получалось так, как это должно было быть.
In other words, we had a very good reputation. We needed such a high authority to stand side by side with Jawaharlal Nehru. He had it.
Вот рядом с Джавахарлалом Неру, это легендарный президент Индии. И, в общем, надо было быть человеком очень высокого авторитета. Он у него был.
Established in 1955, the National Oil and Gas Corporation was headquartered in Dehradun. The building is the Indian National Oil History Museum now. You can see a lot of things about Tagiyev and other Azerbaijan oilmen who once worked there with him. Still, there are almost myths and legends about the extraordinary abilities of Tagiyev, who was known as a Russian engineer. But if you look at his life, the path he lived through, you can be sure that the environment where he grew up had a role in his extraordinary talent. Before coming to India, Tagiyev was famous, highly reputed specialist in his country.
В этом доме по Большой крепостной 38 в 1912 году
Eyyub Tagiyev Ismail was born in 1912 and grew up here, 38 Boyuk Gala Street in Baku.
мой дядя, отца двоюродный.
He was my father's cousin, so can be considered as my uncle.
Крепостные.
They were indigenous resident of the old city.
Они жили в этом доме по Большой крепостной 38.
His grandfather and father also lived in this building. His grandfather, Agad Dadash, was a merchant. His father was the financier. He worked as a manager at a firm at Tarashenko Brothers before the Soviet Union.
Братья Терещенко. После установления советской власти
He had several financial positions after the Soviet Union was established. Then he worked as a bank director in Azerbaijan for his entire life. Eyyub Tagiyev went to school, number 1, nearby in Tolstoy Street.
Тагиев, он учился в первой школе, которая находится здесь недалеко, на улице Толстого.
16 yaşı olanda Eyyub Neft ve Kimya Enstitüsü'nde.
When he was 16, he entered the Oil and Chemistry Institute, now known as Azerbaijan State Oil Academy. After graduation, he was sent to Lokhbatan Buta drilling block in 1932. Attracting attention for his skills and talent, the young engineer was promoted to senior constructor at the drilling machines department, and then he pursued his fate in the area.
Sonralar Eyyub Tagiyev bütün talihini bu işle bağladı. 1937 yılda
Surakani Special Experimental Drilling Group was created in 1937. 26-year-old Tagiyev was the head of this group, which employed the most talented engineers from Baku and Moscow. The staff had a task to develop a principally new construction of depth engines and drilling machines.
Prinsipçe yeni konstruksiyasını yaratmak tapşırığı koyulmuştu.
Это вообще очень интересное явление была вообще вот эта группа, потому что, по сути дела, над ними не было начальства.
The establishment of such a group was a very interesting case then. In fact, there was no direct supervision over them. This was a separate group established at the highest level, but of course was watched by the government and Central Committee. This was not to supervise the work, just to help them. Neither the party's Central Committee nor anyone in scientific organizations supervised them. See, this was such a trusted group. They were then called Special Equipment Drilling Group. The depth engines and slant and horizontal drilling machines they developed are now used in drilling all over the world today. Perhaps the form has changed, but the essence remains.
Это то, чем сейчас бурит весь мир. Конечно, изменились, конечно, что-то, разумеется.
Onlar evvel 40 pilleli, daha sonra ise
They first created the 40-speed, then 100-speed drilling machines. For the first time in world practice, a machine capable of working in clay environment was created. Tagiyev used to explain to the staff how to operate the new drilling machines. The young engineer would never have imagined that his invention would be accepted as a revolutionary change in oil drilling around the world.
İnkılabı değişiklik kimi kabul edilecek.
В этой работе Советский Союз оказался пионером. Как это вот одна из немногих работ, потому что это требовало время.
The Soviet Union became a pioneer in this area. This was one of the rare cases. It was time and labor-consuming. The war required more accelerated drilling. The standard drilling was there, a drill bit and tip of drilling string, and it was necessary to rotate the entire pipes. However, it is slow to drill. When turbine drilling machine was put there, there was no need to rotate the pipe set. Liquid was pumped there, which caused the turbine to rotate and operate the cutters. So, this accelerated drilling worked to supply tanks, aviation, and industry with oil. The invention was pioneer. But later on, almost a year near the end of the 1950s, licenses for the first samples were obtained by France and the United States, and they made some changes to create their own turbine drilling machines.
Ну и были уже разработаны соответствующие, они уже вносили изменения, появились турбоборы уже в этих странах тоже появились, но это позже было.
Это первый раз в истории, можно сказать, в истории человечества, США купила у России, ну, Советского Союза, что-нибудь в плане, так сказать, вот, научных и инженерных разработок. Что-нибудь.
In its history, perhaps the first time in history of mankind, the United States was buying something from the Soviet Union. They were the very turbine drilling machines developed under the supervision of Tagiyev. It was critical technology. They needed slant drilling for many wells. 80 to 90% of wells were drilled by turbine drilling here then. It was a question of prestige, not money. It was like acknowledgement that there was something the United States was not able to do. This was a terrible thing for them. Can you imagine? The issue was dealt with by the U.S. Congress, not by Dresden Industries. But in fact, taking the free market laws, the company should have asked the Congress each time whether to buy something or not. However, this issue was handled by the Congress. You can imagine what those turbine drilling machines meant for that period.
Хотя, в принципе, при их свободной рыночной экономике и так далее, сказать, фирма решила и закупила, и что, можно спрашивать каждый раз, что ничего там у Конгресса, а здесь Конгресс решал. Понимаете, вот что такое был турбобур в те времена.
İkinci Dünya Müharibəsinin
Outbreak of the Second World War sharply increased the demand for Baku oil. Baku was supplying 75% of the country's demand for oil. However, in the summer of 1942, the situation in the Caucasus front started to worsen. As the enemy was approaching the Transcaucasian, transportation was becoming tense in the Caspian Sea. Azerbaijan maintained contact with the country only through the sea. Occupation of the North Caucasus isolated the Transcaucasia from the central industrial regions of the country. The leadership of the country began to think about oil exploration in the eastern regions of the USSR. Under the command of the USSR State Defense Committee, the Myasnikov production plant operated the Baku Experimental Drilling Group together with all the equipment, was moved from the city of Krasnokamsk in Perm province.
Отец отвечал за посадку. Значит, выезжала вся контора бурения со всем этим инструменты все.
My father was responsible for loading. All drilling tools and equipment were loaded for transportation. I remember that it was autumn in 1941 and I was in a fur coat. I was nearly 3 years old. Imagine that the ramp on cables from the coastal ship were swinging over the sea.
Представьте себе трап, который висит над водой в море. Там
My mother held me in one hand and keeping my baby brother in her other hand. As people move on the ramp, it was swinging. Naum Ilyich Buyanovsky was among those who controlled the resettlement. Of course, he could not control everybody individually. I remember that I looked down by holding the handrail at the edge of the ramp. I was very scared. Then we were placed in lower compartments on the ship. We went through the Caspian Sea, then the Volga River, and finally through Kama River. Then they settled us in a village house there, everyone in the same place. We slept on the floor where rats and cockroaches were running. We stayed there for almost 2 days. Then they took us to a building called White House. It was barracks. Our area included a bedroom, a large corridor, and a large Russian staff. My father, my mother, my brother, and our nanny Kuchumova started to live there.
Там, значит, мама, папа, я, Ильмар, и наша няня, бабушка Кучумова, как мы ее называли.
The Tagiyev group started to look for new oil fields at the second Baku. However, the rocks were stronger in the foothills of the Ural, and traditional drilling methods were a problem. Therefore, it was necessary to create a new type of drill bit.
Когда их эвакуировали, всю эту контору бурения, эвакуировали в Краснокамск.
After the entire drilling group was evacuated to Krasnokamsk, they drilled the first industrial wells here while they had drilled test wells in Baku. Oil was being produced in this way during the war. This played a certain role in the fate of the war. This is not an exaggeration. It was the second Baku. First, for while there was no contact in Baku from the strategic point of view, it was not possible to rely on Baku for oil. Another oil source was needed. If the second Baku became such a source, wells there were drilled by Tagiyev, Guzman, and others with their inventions.
Второе Баку, которое разбуривалось турбобурами Тагиева, Гусмана, Анисяна, Шумилова.
He was awarded a laureate of the USSR State Prize in 1942 for his invention. But later on, he would be awarded 2 more times, in 1948 for the invention of slant drilling methods, in 1951 for the invention of double pipe drilling method, to be one of the very rare persons in the history of the USSR to receive this award 3 times. In 1945, a special state mission separated Tagiyev from his favorite profession. He was appointed as a special representative of the USSR's People's Commissariat for Oil to supervise the demounting of installations in Germany and transfer of equipment and materials for use in the oil industry in the USSR. At that time, on its initiative, Europe's most modern and largest radio electronics plant, Telefunken, was demounted and brought to Azerbaijan. This is the area of Turbo Vibrator Laboratory created by Eyyub Tagiyev at All Union Scientific Research Institute of Drilling Engineering. After the war, he tested his inventions in this laboratory. However, his principal duty was to engage in human resources development for the oil industry at Gubkin Institute, now known as Russian Academy of Gas and Oil.
Bizim Eyyub'la tanışlığımız, dostluğumuz, emeştaşlığımız bununla yaranıptır ki benim...
My acquaintance, friendship, cooperation with Eyyub started when he was a provost of the Moscow Oil Institute and was the rector of the Azerbaijan Oil and Chemistry Institute, now the Oil Academy. I worked as a rector for 20 years, and we've had to cooperate together. We had council meetings. There was a scientific technical council. Eyyub was one of the leaders of that scientific technical council, and I was chairman of the scientific methodical council. Therefore, we had to work together. We frequently met then. He was such a great person with extraordinary ability to listen to people, but also the ability to teach people. Therefore, it was possible to learn a lot from him. Therefore, my personal contacts with him are a good part of my autobiography. From his personality, he was a very good, honest man, a very smart, intellectual man. He was very good for our country. Such an intellectual person who used to visit foreign countries and represent the nation of Azerbaijan abroad. Although he was head of the Department of Drilling Process Technology and Research at the Gubkin Institute, they didn't allow him to quit the post of Academy Chairman of the main drilling department of the USSR Ministry of Oil Industry. Not long after, he became the provost for the scientific research at the Gubkin Institute.
Вообще, это очень интересный, это удивительный человек. Я вот...
He was a very strange man. I have come to the conclusion that a man may have three different consciousnesses. The first is the general consciousness, which allows humans to adapt to the environment. The second is what I call professional consciousness, the consciousness that has nothing to do with the first. The third is the social consciousness. That is to say, human exists on Earth, and he cannot go anywhere. This is a philosophical thing. I have met throughout my life few people who had all these at a very high level. Very recently, maybe 10 to 15 years ago, I came to the conclusion that among people I have met, Eyyub Ismailovich was probably the only person with these three consciousnesses at all highest levels. Therefore, when he worked in the industrial area, or when in science, and even doing political and administrative work, and even when meeting heads of state such as Jawaharlal Nehru and the Brazilian president, in any case, he always came to success. Indeed, not only he didn't have a failure, but also he never had any stumblings. All of this success can be attributed to this having all of these three consciousness at a very high level, at which time complement each other, although seemingly not related to each other.
Потому что вот, видимо, вот эти три ума, они были развиты очень высоко, что очень редко бывает, и один подстраховывал, видимо, другой.
O daxili dünyasındaki saflıqdan.
He could easily win the hearts of everyone by the purity of his internal world, his sincerity and honesty. He lives in the memory of everyone who just talked to him for a short time, who were friends with him for years, or who worked with him. The life continued in the memory has its own laws, time laws. This time can pause, flow back, accelerate or slow. This is the second life of a man.
Bu insanın ikinci ömrüdür.
Когда было 25 лет мне, а мой отец ровно на 25 лет старше меня, с разницей в 2 года.
I was 25 years old when my father turned 50. We had a party at our house. My father invited friends and I invited my friends. We were mainly students, both girls and boys. Then we were young. That was a very strange party. My father was sitting in one of the rooms with his oldest of friends, and I was with my friends in another room. A few hours later, we felt that the girls were not with us. They slowly went to their neighboring rooms. I asked the girls what happened, and they explained to me that there was an uncle there so attractive that one would fall in love at first sight. His gentle humor, playing piano, dance, in other words, all of them were likely in love. It all looked understandable because he was very funny.
Он был вот такой человек, он был очень веселый человек.
1963 yılın çiskinli Mart gününde
On a drizzly March day in 1963, a motorcade carrying the national flag of Brazil was racing up the government house from Sheremetyevo Airport after the mysterious suicide of President Getulio Vargas, the vice president of Goulart, who ruled the country after the president, were trying to hide his feelings along the road, but looked excited. After a few hours at the meeting with the Soviet leadership, Goulart made the formal request for assistance to create Brazil's national oil industry. The leadership knew well whom they could rely on in this mission. Tagiyev was already in Brazil in April of 1963. As the news broke, some Western experts said, Soviet specialists cannot rule the nature. Oil exploration in Brazil is just a waste of time. Tagiyev, along with his colleague Ernest Bakirov, did exploration work along the Amazon Valley. The Soviet specialists' initial predictions shook the entirety of Brazil. Brazil President João Goulart said in his televised speech, "Although some people declared that our resources were limited, it is very important for us to find new fields." Recently, the Soviet specialists Bakirov and Tagiyev, after a long and intense exploration activity here, presented irrefutable evidence of Brazil's sitting on huge oil resources. After that, Petrobras had asked them to extend their stay in Brazil. From Tagiyev's diary, and we had to stay another half of a year, on planes, ships, motor vehicles, and boats, in 40-degree temperatures, in high humidity, and accompanied by insects through the jungles. Through stony and cactus lands, we traveled more than 25,000 kilometers. And every day we were more confident that there were huge oil and gas reserves hiding in Brazil's depths.
nəhəng neft və qaz ehtiyatları gizlənir.
Они жили в отеле прямо на пляже, ну, на набережной, вернее, там же набережная идет колоссальная, пляж называется.
Their hotel was on the seaside, and there was so-called Copacabana beach nearby. He found a postcard depicting that hotel and posted it on his window. Ernest Bakirov later on said that because weather was usually very hot, they had to start working day very early and finish by noon. When they come back to the hotel, they see children playing football. He would take off his shoes and join children to play football. Imagine playing football with small kids. Bakirov said he was 12 years his junior, but he was playing football. Of course, his merits were highly appreciated by Petrobras, because Americans said to them that there is no oil in Brazil, but they found oil.
Можно сказать, нефть открыли, хотя до этого были американцы, сказали, в Бразилии нефти нет.
When they returned to Rio de Janeiro, Jornal de Brazil published an article with a first page showing Ernest Bakirov a portfolio in his hand. The picture had a caption, "All the secrets of Brazil's oil are in this portfolio."
Вы знаете что, значит, когда в любой стране, Бруней, там, Бурунди, открывают...
Be it Brunei or Burundi, it doesn't matter where. Finding huge oil reserves leads to deep resonance all over the world. This immediately changes the energy balance all over the world. It causes changes in positions of the different countries. This means a change in transatlantic, transcontinental transportation, and God knows what else. Therefore, discovering oil in both India and Brazil changed the energy balance of the world. The discovery of oil, this was a very big deal.
Это колоссально.
Upon his return to Moscow, there was another surprise awaiting Eyyub Tagiyev. Despite the fact that the Institute had repeatedly asked him to collect and submit his documents to defend his doctorate's dissertation, he avoided it each time under different pretexts. But he authored more than 50 books, monographs, and scientific papers. He had 18 international patents for his discoveries. In December 1965, the Scientific Council of the Guggen Institute awarded Tagiyev his doctorate of technical sciences when he was on a business trip. Unaware of what happened, Tagiyev was invited to the Supreme Attestation Commission and was solemnly presented with diploma of Doctorate of Science.
Bizim çoklu neft sahasında mütehassislerimiz var. Cüzlü mütehassislerimiz var.
We have a lot of oil specialists, good specialists. There are top-level scientists, but I can tell you that Tagiyev is on top of that list. He is on top because his light is spread all over the world. His achievement was the invention of techniques for the oil industry, made him famous around the world. One of the main factors of the implementation of oil strategy now were the inventions made by Tagiyev and the consistent development of those inventions. Therefore, our people, nation, science, oil equipment in the world, oil science owed to Tagiyev. No matter how many years pass, it is not possible to pay his debt.
Milletimiz, ilmimiz, teknikamız, neyinki bizim, bütün dünyanın neft teknikası, neft ilmi Eyyub'a çok borçludur. Ne kadar iller geçse de onun borcundan çıkmak mümkün değil.
Yine de Hindistan. Qəhrəmanımız haqqında bu hekayətimizin sonunda yenidən
Again, India. Coming back to India at the end of the story is not accidental. On the night of January 25th, 1956, Tagiyev had already been in India a couple of months, and he was writing his diary in his hotel room. Today is India's 5th anniversary. Everyone else is happy. Tomorrow I will turn 44 years old. Actually 45 by my passport. I don't know why, but on my birthdays I always feel sad, preoccupied and strange, and think about death. Time goes by, one more year out of my life. I wonder how many good days are left. Maximum 10 times 12? 120? 120 months? No, it seems I made it too many. Maybe it's 6 times 12, equaling 72, and I will be an old man.
Sonunda demiyorlar ki koca kişi olacağım.
Последний раз Eyyub Тагиева я встретил в 66-67 году.
I last met Eyyub Ismailovich in 1966. I don't exactly remember what month it was. I visited his office when I was in Moscow. He told me to have a seat and we will soon go to his house. After talking a little, we went to his home. He lived near the Staromonetny Circle, not far from the then Udarnik cinema. The building was a very old one with high ceilings. His apartment was on the 4th floor. There was a thing that surprised me. When we went up the stairs, we stopped at each stair landing, went around the perimeter of the landing, and then continued. I asked him the reason, and he just said, "You will know what the heart is when you reach my age." Then I didn't take it that seriously because he was athletic, having a good physical structure and cheerful face. 2 to 3 months later, I received a call from Moscow that he had died. The news was completely unexpected.
И буквально прошло 2-3 месяца, вдруг позвонили из Москвы и сказали, что он скончался. Это было довольно-таки неожиданно очень.
Я думаю, что одна из причин, которую он себе подорвал здоровье вот так вот.
I think one of the problems with his health was a heavy burden on his shoulders. So, my father lost his health in India. The climate in India is very hard for Europeans. It is very difficult to live there, and the humidity is unbelievable. The same thing happened to Eyyub Ismailovich. He lived in India a few years, then in Brazil. All of these were not without reason.
Бразилия. Эти вещи даром не проходят.
Заболел он под Новый год. И уже за новогодним столом он сидел очень слабый.
He was very weak on New Year's Eve. He looked very tired and a little sentimental. So he was looking at everybody with grief. He was sent a basket of violets. There was a piece of paper in that basket. When my mother wanted to approach, he took the paper. After reading it, he was like out of himself. It seemed he had tears in his eyes. I think he felt his death. His eyes were expressing something that didn't belong to him. He didn't make joke, just doing nothing. Then he had a heart attack and diagnosed with influenza. He was not allowed to walk. He was not taken to hospital. Infarction was in the back wall of the heart. A week later, he had a massive heart attack. I was then on holiday around Moscow. My husband came for me. He didn't tell me anything about this, as he knew that I wouldn't be able to get to Moscow in that situation. When we came home by taxi from railway station, I realized everything. I saw a lot of people gathered at Staromonetny Circle, and I understood everything at once. There were so many people there. Nobody brought these people here. They just came because they didn't believe what they heard. We went upstairs, passing through people. There were so many people that the Lenin Avenue was closed during burial. There was a farewell ceremony at the assembly hall of the Oil Institute. No one did believe his death. They were sobbing silently.
В актовом зале прощание было нефтяного института. Настолько люди не верили, сплошной рев стоял. Все плакали, все.
Onun keçdiyi həyat yoluna nəzər salanda istər-istəməz düşünməli olursan. Məhz bu cür insanlar yaşadıkları...
When you take a look at his life, you willy-nilly think that such people, regardless of the time, environment, social system, they go through storms and choppiness that never allow the light inside them to die, to go out. Such people never retard, thinking about themselves for their convenience. And ordinary civic duty sometimes becomes that powerful to change the fate of a nation, the image of the world. When you look at the way they lived, you see that they had a mission to serve all of humanity in all of their actions.
Bütövlükdə insanlığa, bəşəriyyətə xidmət missiyasının dayandığı aşkara çıxır.